This is going to be the Ask a SolarWinds Support Application Engineer Anything. My name is Kevin Sperrazza. I've been working at SolarWinds for 10 years as of last week, supporting the product the entire time, moving up through the ranks up to Senior Application Engineer. My primary expertise is on the Orion Platform. I specialize in NPM, SAM, vMan, and WPM, but I'm pretty knowledgeable about most of the products. This session is largely for you. Feel free to ask any questions that you guys come up with. And if you want to know how it works, the product works, if you want to know how to use it, you name it, we're here to answer whatever questions you're looking for. I've got some pre-planned questions that we're going to go through, like they said, some common things that we hear in support. So we'll go ahead and start and kind of dive right into that. But as you guys think of any questions, dump them in chat, and then we'll get to them as they come up. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. So probably the most common thing we hear in support at almost any level is Orion is slow, right? It's something we deal with on a daily basis. We get it every single week, 24/7, all the time, right? So there's a couple of things that we can look at for this, right? So the most common things we start to ask when we see, we get the Orion is slow. Why is it slow? Things we ask for, is it a particular web page, right? This is important because, all the web pages on the web console are a little different. They all load different types of data, and they're showing you different information, right? Are the applications on the web server slow? Something like the Universal Device Puller or the report writer in older ones, or is it just kind of universally slow across the board? So there's a lot of different slowness type issues that we run into, and they're all kind of treated a little bit differently. So we'll kind of go into the first one here, right? And so when it comes down to slowness of the web page, probably the most common thing we see is, when I try to load up a node, my node details page is just extremely slow. It won't load, or it does. If it does load, it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes to load, right? And so there's a couple of things that we can look at for that. And let's go ahead and bring up one of my devices real fast. So here we have the node detail page for one of my nodes in my lab here. And here we can see a bunch of resources on the page. Now, when you look at this page, there's only a handful of resources on it, but this doesn't really tell the entire story of the web page, right? Something that we would normally go into is come into the page settings on a details. On this page, you can see there's a lot more going on this than meets the eye. We have a lot of resources here that don't necessarily show up on the web console when you load them. And that's because resources on the page that have no data to display will automatically hide. However, they still contribute to the overall load time of a page. They're all different SQL calls, business layer calls that get hit to the back end that still take up time to load. Right. And so if you come onto this page, you should be able to see everything that this page can load. Not necessarily that it will load, but it can load. If you look through this list of different resources, anything that you can pull out that you don't need, that you're just not going to be using, any web fronting, if you have any RSS feeds or THWACK resources on here that may contribute to a slower load time, right? Custom resources that you have on here that may be loading a huge query, you can see all of them here, right? Even though they may not show up when the page loads, they still get counted, right? And so anything that you can remove from this list is going to contribute to better load times. And that kind of goes for any page that you've got, summary pages, detail pages. If there's anything on the page that you don't need or you're not using, or was just put there by accident, take it off, and that's going to lend to overall better performance, right? If you've got any custom reports or any custom resources that are loading huge pieces of data, then that's something you can also look at. Another thing that we can look at here, right? Another thing that we can look at here for slowness, if you guys were around for Kevin Toomey's session, is Hubble. And so you can turn Hubble on in Log Adjuster. So he was mentioning this earlier. Hubble active is currently set to false. So we can set this to true in the Log Adjuster. So you would do this on either the primary polling engine or your additional web servers, depending on which website you're hitting, you need to make sure to turn it on the right server. So if you're loading the web console on a primary server, you need to turn it on the primary server. If you're loading a web console on an additional web server, you need to turn it on for the additional web server. So now that we have it turned off, I'm connected to my additional web server, we can reload the page. Once you turn on Hubble, the web console here takes a little longer to load. And you can see it's just spinning. So when you turn it on, you're going to get a bit of a longer load time. But once it eventually loads, there we go, we should get some new information that we can use to kind of pin down some issues with slowness, right? And so don't be afraid, because once you turn it on, it does take a little bit longer. But we're going to get some good information once it kicks over. So there we go. And now once you've turned it on, you have this little red box up here that says Hubble. And we can expand this out. So this is what Kevin Toomey was talking about earlier in the session. So here at the top, we get some nice information about kind of what happened and the breakdown of time spent loading this page. You can see at the top, we've got 2,000 milliseconds, so about 2.5 seconds worth of time spent worth loading data from the database, right? So we've got about 9.7%. Below it, we have the business layer time. So this is the SolarWinds services that are utilized during the page load to get the data to load the page, right? And you can see that only took about 28 milliseconds. That really wasn't the issue. And then other time here is going to be things like network or the server itself. So you can see here, really the server spent the most time thinking about the load on the page and giving us the data back. Even further down, we can see a breakdown of all the different queries and calls that were made for that page load, right? And you need to see here at the top, it was loading my user, right? We can kind of scroll through. And what you would normally look for is, if you have a slowness issue, is a large number here, right? So this is in milliseconds. So you can scroll through the list and kind of see what's being loaded, right? You can see all these different queries that get loaded. Even though, this is not a VoIP node, it's still doing checks for VoIP data, because there's a VoIP resource on the page. And you can scroll through the list and look for any queries. You can go back and look for any queries that may be taking a long time, right? So you can kind of narrow it down to a resource or a type of data that may be taking a long time on the page to load, and then you can, remove the resource, adjust the resource, or if it's a backend issue, if it's a SQL issue, you can look into bottlenecks or issues with getting that data. Looks like we have a question came up here. Is there a way to aggregate NTA data going back a year? I'm not sure what you mean by aggregate it all. I'm assuming you mean, how can I consolidate from NTA betas for a year as in NPM database? So I'm not really sure what you mean by that. I think you mean by move data from one database to the next. If you could clarify that a little bit, I might be able to give you a little bit better of an answer. But as far as migrating data for NetFlow, if you're going from Fastbit to SQL, there is no database migration for that. So you're just kind of have to start over for that one. But if you could further clarify the question, that would be awesome. Anyway, going back here. So if you scroll through, you can see all the different queries, and you're kind of looking for a resource that is taking a lot of time, right? You can kind of see which ones it is. You can also sort by origin, type, time, so you don't have to necessarily scroll through the entire bit. So you can see this one took the most at 61 milliseconds, and you can see what it kind of did. So this was a switch stack resource for the node, and it took about 61 milliseconds to load. So that's pretty good. And you can kind of see what's going on. So this is very helpful in determining overall slowness on the page. And like I said, if there's any resources on here that can be removed, they probably should be removed, because they're just going to contribute to slowdowns. They all take time to load. Yeah. So this is talking about if there's any widget on the page that you can remove, go ahead and get them removed, because they're just going to contribute. So good candidates for remove. So if there's anything that you don't need, please remove them, because they're just going to contribute to overall slowness on the web page. So another pretty common complaint for slowness or web slowness is, I come in the morning first thing and I try to log into SolarWinds, and it takes forever to log into the web console. It spins for 2-3 minutes, maybe longer, before it finally logs into the web console. And after that, everything's fine, right? That's another pretty common web slowness that we see. Generally, that's caused by the app pool process spinning up in the mornings, right? So by default, the app pool is set to shut down after about 20 minutes, right? So I've set mine. So you'll have an idle, by default, this is set to 20, right? So after 20 minutes of idleness, the website app pool process will terminate. It'll shut down. So after 20 minutes of non-use, it'll shut down. So when you try to log back into the web console, it has to spin back up and it takes a long time to load. Right. And so what we can do here is if you have this problem and you're not, you don't really like it, you can change this. A common one is to change it to 24 hours. So as long as the web console gets hit within 24 hours, you won't have that slowness right when you log in, and you can hit save. And as long as you're hitting it once every 24 hours, the login for the page and the initial load of the website shouldn't slow down. Another common bit is slow server applications, right? Virtualized infrastructure tends to be the biggest one here, right? Adding more processors and memories don't necessarily make things better, right? Because it more often than not, it's either an overworked host or it's borrowing resources to get better performance. So not necessarily giving giving it more memory and CPU doesn't necessarily always help. Especially if the underlying host is overutilized, right? And so in cases like this, what we would normally recommend would be to reserve resources that can be utilized specifically for SolarWinds instead of just having it, if the VM needs more information or more memory and CPU, it'll just kind of request it. But if you can reserve the CPU, it'll be a lot better. That way it doesn't have to worry about contending with other VMs on the same infrastructure. If that still doesn't help, we might recommend moving to a new hypervisor, but that's going to require you talking to VM admins to get that move done. Right. So if it's an issue with CPU and memory contention, right, you'll usually see it here, and you can request and reserve, and we would definitely recommend reserving the resources so that your VM doesn't have to compete with other VMs on the same host for resources. So it looks like we have a question. We have an issue with a managed alert page not responding, happens to multiple users. Okay, so if we bring this up, the alert page. Okay, so this is the page, or at least this page is what you're referring to. If you're having issues with alerts pages or active alert pages or manage alert pages in general, like this one here, first things you can think about is how many active alerts do I have? A large, if we come into the database here, if you have a large, there it is. All right, if this table is particularly large, right, you have a lot of active alerts in the system, or a lot of alerts in general, thousands of alerts, right? Then this page can slow down, especially the active alerts. It can tend to time out. So if you've got an issue where none of these pages are loading, the first things that I would look at is how many alerts do I have triggered? Right now, you can see I've got 76, but it's not uncommon to see some customers with thousands and thousands and thousands, right? Once you start and get to the thousands, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 active alerts, these pages can start to slow down and in some cases not load. The manage alerts page, right? If this particular page isn't loading, it can be an issue with a bad alert. If there's an alert that's causing some kind of issue on the back end, the first things that we'd probably look at is something like going into the weblog, which we can do over here, and see if there's some kind of failing query, right? If this is an issue that you're having, it's not fixed by, say, turning off some alerts that are maybe causing thousands of active alerts to appear. Right, I definitely recommend you open up a support ticket, but what we'd end up probably looking at is the weblog. So when you try to load this page and it spins and spins and spins and it eventually fails, right? We should eventually see the error here, right? And see what's going on and then potentially fix it. But usually issues with pages with the alerts pages tend to be because people are flooding the active alerts with thousands of alerts, whether that's on purpose or an accident. More often than not, having thousands of active alerts is on accident. Somebody created an alert that just triggers on everything in the system, and you just end up with a bunch of alerts, and you just get a kind of a sluggish page here. So it looks like we have another question. When using high availability with geo-separate database replicas, could you force the failed over polar service to use the nearest database spec with the lowest response time. So unfortunately, this is not something that you can do on our end, right? So when you set up SolarWinds, or even HA for that matter, when you run the configuration wizard, you point it at the database, right? You point it at whatever you've given us, whether it be a cluster, a specific server, an always-on group, whatever it is. So the software will only communicate to that database that you've got configured. So if there's a closer one that it should be connecting to, that kind of swap is something that's going to be taken on either the SQL side or something else in the environment. There's no configuration on the SolarWinds side that you can say, when using this polling engine, use this database, because each polling engine in the system needs to be configured to use the same database, and that's done during the wizard. Let me just look through some more questions here. How to troubleshoot when Orion stops pulling statistics data. All services are up, all pages is low, just empty charts from certain time on. Restart of services help. Oop. I missed that message. And so that's another good one. So if you have an issue with polling, there could be a couple of reasons why. The first things we look at is it specific nodes that are having the problem? Is it a specific node, like a specific model of Cisco device or a specific HP device? Is it only those nodes that have a problem? Is it only a single device, or if it's every device in the system? Or if you have multiple polling engines, is it only devices on polling engine 2 versus polling engine 1? Right. So if it's something like an all nodes on my system are not polling, there's a couple of things we can look at. If your services are in fact running, right? So this is my primary. I've stopped these for the sake of performance, but if all of your services here are running, collector, job engine are the two ones that are really responsible for collections here. So if every node in the system is not collecting, the first thing I would probably look at, especially if restarting the services helps for a while, right? The first thing I would probably look at is something like MSMQ. Right? So we use MSMQ to process a lot of the data once it's pulled, right? And you can see all of these queues represent different types of polling, right? And so we have, and you can see here, there's a bit of messages. So if it polls for a while and then stops and then restarting services helps for a time, then it could be that MSMQ is getting backed up. Here you can see, there's a bit of messages here, but if I refresh, they'll probably go away. Well, they're still there. But anyway, if you come here and you look at this and you sort by the first column here, what we might see if all nodes stop polling is a bunch of messages sitting here, thousands, right? They'll be just sitting here backing up. Once these queues hit a certain limit, they'll just lock up forever until you come in here and clear them. So if all nodes across the board stop collecting statistic data, this is probably what's going on. If this is not the issue, then there might be an issue with processing data, a different way of processing the data. It could be something with database maintenance, right? If database maintenance isn't working, it's not moving the data around in the database properly, and it may get to a point where it can't write any new data, in which case it'll look like all your data stopped polling. What generally happens when you get to issues like that is data is not actually stopped polling, right? The job engine is actually doing all the collecting. It's the processing the data once we have it that becomes a problem. Right, and that tends to be where we look. But this is probably the first place I would look, is somewhere here in MSMQ, to make sure that these queues are healthy. They should be 0, or if they do have data in them, they should be going down to 0. Right, if they're going up, that's bad. If they're going down, that's okay. Right, but that's where we'd probably look if collections across the board just stopped working, and would have to go from there. Let me look through, make sure we got all these questions. Any more questions? All right, cool. So it looks like all the questions we have so far have been answered. Anyway, so kind of back to overall slowness of the platform with your database. There's a couple of things that we can look at. One big thing that we probably start with is active diagnostics, right? There's a really cool, and I believe Kevin might have mentioned this earlier, Kevin Toomey, but we can run specific tests for SQL. Database, where are you at? There it is. Right, and we can look at SQL optimization test, and we can run it. Oh, run a little better. And we can run these different tests. Oh, where are they? Looks like I've got most of it here. So let's bring up the web console because I think it's going to be a better example. Here we go. Here you can see in the slide, right, where you can come and collect database diagnostics. So this is a really good output of the different database settings that you've got and what they are and what we recommend them to be, right? And so you can provide this output to your SQL guy to make sure that the settings that you've got and the settings that we recommend are in line, right? And so that way you're getting the best possible backend performance that you can get based on the settings that we're requesting. Do we have any other questions that we want to go over? We're kind of running low on time, so I want to get to as many questions as possible. Any tips on improving NTA query performance? I noticed that the NTA database is quite large, and most of it is in a single table name. So the biggest thing about NTA performance, right, is that NTA uses its own database. It's separate from the main Orion database, right? So you can kind of see here, we've got a NetFlow database. So the biggest thing for NTA performance is, one, to make sure you have a strong SQL server that meets the recommendations that we require. All right, and so that way you can kind of push the amount of data that, or handle the amount of data that you're working with in a reasonable amount of time, right? Secondly, it's recommended in especially large systems that you have the NetFlow database on its own SQL server because of how hard we hit NetFlow, especially in large systems, because it's a lot of data, right? That's going to be going over the network and writing to the disks, and so being on its own SQL server will help a lot in that case, right? And so you also want to make sure that in this case, if it is large, that the maintenance of NetFlow is working, right? So the database maintenance runs every day. You want to make sure that it's being handled properly and the data is being moved around the way it should. All right, so that's another big one. Also, if it's on the web console where you're seeing the slowness for NetFlow, Hubble is also another good one. You can kind of see where that bottleneck is, because maybe it's not the SQL server, right? If your SQL server really is that strong, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's the network. Maybe it's the IIS server. You can pull Hubble up using the log adjuster, kind of refresh the page and then see where that slowdown may be, and then adjust accordingly. But it looks like we're getting down to the last minute here. I'm sorry, we can get through more of your questions. We can spend all day pretty much talking about different issues, different things going on. But we're going to have wrap this one up. This isn't the last session of the day. This is the last session, I believe, for customer success. But you'll want to go ahead and head over to the main channel for the last sessions, and I believe there's a grand prize at the end of all of this. So hopefully some of you guys or one of you guys will win it. Other than that, good luck. Thanks for joining the session, and you guys have a good day.